And a very good evening to the Extreme Business Academy. We are recording this interview towards the end of January 2020, and I'm just going to dive straight in. It's a Monday evening. I don't know what it's like where you are, Claire, but it's cold and dark and miserable and freezing here in Manchester, and I'm just sat here down in the Barrow bunker sheltering from the weather. But it's my absolute delight to welcome our guest to this broadcast, orthodontist, business owner, award-winning dentist, Claire Nightingale. And Claire and I have kind of been aware of each other in the dental landscape for years and years and years. But there was a real turning point for me, which is that I turned up at the British Orthodontic Society conference was it September, Claire, last year?
It was September 19, yeah.
And it just so happened that I managed to pop into the back of the room where Claire was giving a presentation to the audience about her own career. And a confession, what I quite often do is I'll pop into the back of a room and open up my laptop and start doing emails while I'm waiting for my go. But I became completely and utterly engaged and absorbed in the presentation that Claire was giving, and we got chatting afterwards, and I just said, listen, I'd love to be able to share some of that story with the Academy members. So I'm very grateful that you're giving up your time. I know you're busy, but welcome to the Extreme Business Academy, Claire. It's lovely to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. I feel very overhyped.
I
hope I can live up to the story, but
Claire, it's all going to be uphill from here, let me tell you. And just before we start, for the sake of our listeners, just give us a little snapshot of the business that you have right now. Tell us a little bit about it. What is it? Where is it? And what does it do? Just give me a picture.
Okay, so I wear two hats. I'm an NHS consultant part-time, but I also have a specialist private practice, an orthodontic practice in South Kensington in southwest London. So I had the good fortune to buy it from an outgoing sole principal with whom I still had the wonderful experience of lunch with today, in fact, 7.5 years on post the transaction. So we had such a happy experience that I would describe us as being still good friends today. When I bought the practice, it was one chap working with two members of staff. It wasn't computerized. It didn't even have a credit card machine. And all the cash flow was done on invoices and checks and a ledger basis. So I have transformed that business now from a 2-surgery to a 3-surgery practice. And I have increased the staff numbers from 2 to 6. And we're now fully computerized. And of course, the first thing I did actually was to make it easy for patients to pay. So the first thing I did was indeed to refurbish one surgery so it was really fit for purpose for me and getting a credit card machine.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And let's now wind the clock back even further. Now, there's a bit of a standing joke in my world, which is that if you ever say to a dentist, could you tell me your life story? They always begin with the phrase, I qualified in, as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
But qualification. So can we go back a bit?
Okay, Chris, we're going to go back a long way.
Ooh,
Actually, I know the anecdote that you didn't hear by not being absolutely at the beginning of my presentation was actually about why I became a dentist in the first place. And the reason why I'm going to share with you this story is because I think it's got 3 very important learning points for private practice, dentistry in general, perhaps life in general. And where I want to begin is that when I was 7 years old, we were living in County Durham, in Durham City, in fact, and it was 1970s, and it was the time when serial extractions were popular in orthodontic practice. Not only serial extractions, but general anaesthetics in the dental chair, in fact, were of the moment. So when I was 7 years old, I presented with my Class 1 crowding. And my dentist said, "All right, okay, what she needs is some baby teeth out." He said to my mum, "So we're going to book her in for a general anaesthetic, and could you bring a scarf?" He said. So we didn't know what the scarf was for. So 12 years old, popped off with my mum on the bus to the local general dental practice, had gas in the dental chair. And to this day, the experience was just so dreadful that I can still, at the age of 54, remember I remember the nightmare that I had while I was under general anaesthetic. And I came round, the nurse was wiping tears away from my face, and she asked my mum to hand over the scarf, which my mum duly did. And the scarf, it transpired, was to hold in situ the wedge of gauze that was slapped across my bleeding mouth. So off I went back on the bus, all and bleeding into a wedge of gauze with a scarf tied around my head at the age of 7. So this was my introduction to dental care. And quite astonishing, a year later, my mum got me back on the bus to do the whole repeat again.
No.
So yeah, I know. So there I was, age of 8. That was my dental experience thus far. And then we moved down to Pinner in northwest London. And the first family that we met in my street, the mother happened to be a dental nurse. So she said to my parents, "You must come and be patients of my boss." So off we went to Mr. Wilson, who said, "Oh, you're a bit crowded. I think you need to go and see a specialist." So off I went to a specialist orthodontist in Watford at the age of 10, who was a man called Mr. Marks, who sadly deceased now, but was quite legendary amongst the orthodontic community in his day. And Mr. Marks confirmed that I needed 4 first premolars extracted, sent me back to Mr. Wilson, who popped them out under local anaesthetic over 2 visits. And it was magnificent. No pain, no bleeding, no scarf, no wobbling, no day case anaesthetic. No, not even a day case anaesthetic, of course, no general anaesthetic in the chair. And this was revelatory to me that dentistry could be this good. And that was the moment, I was by this stage 12, that I decided not only would I become a dentist, but I'd become an orthodontist. Yeah. So the 3 points I want to make really as a consequence of this story are 3 very important things to private practice and running a successful dental practice. The first is that what we experienced at that time was a word of mouth referral. So Auntie Barbara, the dental nurse, recommended us as a family to Mr. Wilson, or vice versa. And the consequence of that referral was that Mr. Wilson had my parents as his patients till the day he retired 35 years later. So learning point number 1 is never underestimate the value of a word of mouth referral. The second point really from this story is that what I experienced at the age of 12 was great customer care. Now, I wouldn't actually, of course, at that time have been able to put a label on it. But considering my experience in Durham, which potentially was greatly traumatizing, and then I experienced fantastic care at the hands of Mr. Wilson, and that was transformative. That was a definitive moment, a life-defining moment in my life. Well, it dictated the path the rest of my life, in actual fact. So I experienced great customer care, which had a massive impact on me and was inspirational. And then, of course, the final point from this story was that what I did unwittingly at the age of 12 was I turned a very negative experience into a positive one. So I demonstrated resilience, and which, of course, is really a very buzzword in contemporary education now. So the point I wanted to make by sharing this story is if people take nothing home from the rest of my experience, the 3 keys at this moment to private practice are: treasure your word of mouth referrals, provide great customer care, and turn negative experiences into positive ones. And be resilient. There you go, the 4th learning outcome. All of which I think are very, very neatly demonstrated by that story.
I think we can go home.
Job done.
Job done. Shortest interview in the history of the Academy. It's funny, actually. I had an email from one of my clients a few weeks ago, first week of January, who said, and I was doing some, what was it like being a client of mine in 2019, kind of fishing for the testimonial. And she actually came back to me and said, all these interviews that you do, they're all too long.
There you go, shortest one yet.
Can you do some short ones? But actually, no, I'm not going to let you go yet, because I think there's more than this. So great start. And presumably, I mean, the history proves the point, but presumably the distractions of teenage did not deter you from this chosen path.
No. Yeah. Well, of course. Well, I mean, I inevitably had a dilemma between choosing dentistry or medicine.
Yeah.
I wanted to. I was good with my hands. I was always making things as a child. And I come from a background within a very caring family. I mean, my mother was a social worker and my father was a priest. So, caring for people was very much an ethos that ran through the family.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was my mum in the end who helped me make the decision, because as a social worker, she said, human needs are endless. Go and deal with problems you can solve, she said. And then her second question is, why do you want to make life and death decisions? So I thought, right, okay. Back to being an orthodontist then. What great advice.
Goodness me.
Yeah. So, I mean, having made this decision at 12, that dentistry was something of interest, it actually made all the choices very, very straightforward, because, I knew that I had to do 3 sciences at O-level.
Yeah.
And of course, A-levels was the same. And the only wobble I really had was when I was sitting my A-levels, my grandfather, with whom I was very close, was diagnosed as being terminally ill with cancer. And so I did at that moment have a bit of a wobble, like, maybe I should be doing something, to the greater good than dentistry. But by that stage, I'd submitted my UCA form, had my places, anyway, I made the sensible choice. I'll tell you what, you'll like this story even more. I actually was, at the time, I was a Saturday girl in Debenhams. I was working in menswear. How about that? So I was 16 years old, working in menswear, having an absolute ball, of course. And the manager of the menswear department actually liked to dabble in tarot card readings at the time. So I kid you not. So there I was, hadn't yet got my A-level results. So I said, okay, Ian, perhaps you'd like to do a reading for me. So he laid out 2 choices, didn't tell me which was which, in fact. And what I remember from this experience was, he said, so both choices would be fulfilling, but one would be much harder work than the other and bring me less pleasure. That was the kind of synopsis. And lo and behold, guess which one was medicine? So the medicine was going to be harder work and less pleasurable than being a dentist. So there you go.
And I think that you ended up at Newcastle, didn't you, to do?
Yes, I did. Now here's an even better story for you, Chris, which you'll like. So when I was a school child in Durham, I had a best enemy who was a girl called Judith. And bizarrely, as kids do, particularly little girls, we became best friends on the week before I moved to London. And we're still great friends to this day. And Judith says that her motivation was that I was the first person about to walk out of her life forever at the age of 10. And she found this profoundly sad, even though we obviously hadn't got on terribly well. So, because we were too alike. Anyway, so she made the effort to keep in touch with me. And when I was 17 or so, she said, Newcastle, it's a fantastic city. I'm going to do medicine there. And I think you should come and do dentistry. I think you should come to Newcastle. So I thought, well, it'd be a laugh to be at university with Judith. So I stuck it down to 4th out of 5 on my UCA form. Went up for an interview, loved it. Beautiful building, lovely location. So I decided it would be my first choice. Judith, on the other hand, failed her A-levels, or failed to get the grades, went off to Leicester Poly to do performing arts administration, became a tour manager with Erasure and Simply Red, married an entrepreneur in Glasgow and set up Tea in the Park and King Tut's Wawa Hut, where Oasis was signed, made a fortune and retired at the age of about 35.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So there you go. So it was my experience in my early childhood, perhaps clinched by a tarot card reading, that led me down a career path to dentistry. Newcastle, I was taken there by my previous best enemy, so I could be at university with her. And then her life took a totally different path, and she made millions, retired early, and emigrated to New Zealand.
So I think learning point number 5 there is that it might not be the best thing in the world to pass.
Well, I guess she turned a negative into a positive, didn't she?
Did. There you go. There you go. Point three.
There you go.
Point
You know.
three.
Yeah.
So let's wind this forward a bit. You've bounced out of Newcastle with a degree.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, I was never that great with the air rotor, actually. I never liked all the spray in my face. I never learned how to deal with it. Anyway, so I wasn't deterred. Actually, I wasn't really deterred from orthodontics, but of course, I did think I should do a bit of general experience first. And of course, in those days, of course, I had to become a fellow in dentistry from the Royal College of Surgeons, and I wanted to do a resident max fax job. So of course, I did a house job for a year at Newcastle when I qualified. After that, I then did a couple of years of max fax surgery down in Gloucester and Bath, which I absolutely loved. I really, really adored it. And, let me stitch up a trunk on a Saturday night for a living. Why not? Anyway, I did, of course, consider again, should I at this stage do medicine and have a career in max fax? Flirted with the idea for a month or two and decided on balance I would stick with the original plan and do ortho. So I then went so by this point actually I did part 1 and part 2 fellowship in my 2 years of max fax, studying it when I was on call, etc. Yeah. And then I went and did a maternity locum in general practice. So I went and conquered my fear of the air rotor. I did 6 months general practice, picked up my speed, learned not to mess about, just get on with the task at hand. And then during that time, I applied obviously for orthodontics. I had I ticked all the right boxes. I had publications, I had awards, I had the relevant experiences, and also, of course, planning ahead. I had actually noticed there was a correlation between people that did a certain max fax job at Gloucester Royal Hospital, which had orthodontics in it, and getting into the Eastman Dental Hospital to do SBR training. So I'd set myself up, so one of the things I do is I look ahead, I plan ahead, I notice stuff. So I'd observed from the junior staff that worked with me in Newcastle when I was a house officer, that those that got into the Eastman had a connection with Gloucester Royal. And indeed, there was a very lovely consultant called Alan Cookson, who who would pick up the phone, and he would phone up people on the interviewing panels and say, I've got this fantastic candidate for you. And of course all of that it doesn't happen anymore, but but in those days there was very much an ethos of being able to look out for your juniors and support them in their careers and help make connections on their behalf. Anyway, so but of course, actually, what happened next was that a course came out at Bristol University, which actually was fully funded, because all the London courses were only part-time funded in those days. So what I did was I applied for the first master's programme at Bristol University, and was fortunate enough to be offered the place in February or March time to start in the October. And if planning ahead, it all neatly coincided with the cessation of my maternity locum. So I took off travelling. I secured my place at Bristol, and then I went and skied for 3 weeks in France. And then I got on a plane and went backpacking around the Middle East and then the Far East. Returned within about a week of starting at Bristol and had to find somewhere to live.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was great. It was great.
So how long at Bristol?
3 years. 3 years. So we were the first course to go through. We worked for somebody who we were his heart and soul, and he ran a great course, and we all worked very hard, but we all came out of it with a lot of knowledge, a lot of practical experience, and between us we had so many publications when we came out of that course. We were really encouraged and pushed. Yeah. I was trained by a massively successful and respected group of orthodontists, to whom I'm massively indebted, of course. And at that time, not only did we have a great group of NHS consultants and academics, but we had a specialist practitioner who came down from Harley Street once a month to teach us as a gesture of goodwill. He was a chap called John Bennett, and I was massively inspired by him too. And so when I came out of my course, I was at another crossroads. I thought, well, what do I do? do I follow my inspiration from these amazing consultants that have taught me, or do I follow John's path? In fact, what he said to me, you've got a great pair of hands, and with the way you communicate with your patients and their families, you do really well in private practice, is what he said. And sowed the seed that possibly Harley Street was where it could be at for me. Although, as a Newcastle graduate, a girl in the year below me joked once that she saw herself in Harley Street, and we all went, ha ha ha, fancy that, what, us Newcastle graduates in Harley Street, anyway. But I'm not the first to be in private practice. So I then decided I fancied a foot in both camps, double the benefit, double the burden. So I decided that actually what I would do is I would complete my senior registrar training so that I could become a consultant. But at the same time, I worked in various NHS practices on a Saturday, built up a lot of experience. And when I finally qualified, I then pieced together a part-time week here and there. I did get appointed to become an in-house orthodontist for a multidisciplinary specialist practice in Harley Street. So I did end up in Harley Street, working 2 Saturday mornings a month. And I also had the opportunity ultimately to take over from John Bennett in his practice on an associate with a view basis in the West End. But the things that I then subsequently learned is that life is a long game. And when you're trying to piece together lots of opportunities and ambitions, or lots of ambitions, it doesn't all happen at once. And actually, it took me about 10 to 13 years, I guess, before finally the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle fitted together for me. And during that time, I had a lot of hurdles, in actual fact. And I actually instructed solicitors 5 times on different specialist practice opportunities before I finally found the right one for me. So I had a couple of goes at all sorts of sort of twists and turns and bumps in the road, discussions of partnerships that didn't work out for various reasons, looking at NHS goodwill that I thought was vastly inflated. It was all too much of a risk for me. But I really felt like I'd become a refusing horse. I felt that I explored these opportunities, I got to the last hurdle, and then I would back out. And I actually thought I fundamentally had a problem. I thought that I was unable to close the deal. And I said to my dental nurse at the time, I wouldn't recognise the right opportunity if it hit me in the face. And she said, you will. And indeed, one day when I was in the trough of despair, having my dream ambition of becoming a partner in this lovely practice in the West End failed. And I was working away as a specialist orthodontist a couple of days a week in this multidisciplinary practice in Harley Street, and I was a part-time consultant in Watford. And also by this time I'd had 3 kids, so I hadn't I hadn't spent time unproductively in all senses, put it like that. And one day I got a text from this lovely man called Rod, who said, would I like to come down and look at his practice? He was wanting to retire, so I came down to look at his practice in South Kensington. He opened the door, I stepped across the threshold, it was like, this is it. This is what I knew. It was the one for me, I just walked across the door and it was the fantastic fit. And so I did close the deal. It was quite a different, some people say that it was a big risk. I didn't think it was a big risk because I was being asked to buy a private practice in a lovely location by somebody who wasn't wanting a vast sum of money for goodwill. I think I paid the appropriate price for it.
Yeah.
But what was good for me was that it came with the freehold premises. So I wasn't locked into a Howard Dewalden lease on a short term with an upward only rent review, full insuring and repairing lease. So and in terms of raising the finance, it was very straightforward because I had bricks and mortar to back it up with. And by this stage, of course, whilst I say that I had sort of 10 to 13 years of disappointment, what I was actually doing was I was serving my apprenticeship. So what I was learning was how to deliver great care, great treatment outcomes, and how to manage demanding patients, and how to I served an apprenticeship, put it like that, which of course has stood me in massively good stead now.
When you when you got the keys,
Yeah.
and you became an owner, were there any surprises in the sense that you had not anticipated certain aspects of the job?
Oh, listen, inevitably there weren't any surprises from a clinical point of view. You know, I knew how to look after patients, and I knew how to manage referrers and keep everybody on board, because of course what's different from my world is that I have to keep usually 3 people happy at all times: that the patient, the parent, the referrer.
Yeah.
So it's not just a relationship between me and the patient. I mean, that's not the same for every case, because of course I have a lot of adult patients and I have a lot of self-referrals. But I have to keep in mind that there's always 3 people in the loop that need to be cared for and communicated with and managed. But no, it will come as no surprise to learn it with managing staff.
Yeah.
You know, managing staff, taking over habitual work practices, transforming the practice. So what I learned, as I've reflected upon my career to date and in preparation for the talk at BOC, I realised that what I was doing, looking at those 5 different practices, I was actually doing my due diligence. That's what I was doing. And every single opportunity had a significant flaw that wasn't right for me. It was either a dodgy lease, or it was overvalued goodwill, or it was a partnership that wasn't going to work out. So there were genuinely sensible reasons why I didn't proceed. And painful as it was at the time, they were good opportunities to walk away from, actually. So, and so here I am.
So why did you want to become an owner at all?
Well, I was just driven. Chris. It was something that I think that, you know, if we go back to the very first person who inspired me to become a dentist, it was Mr. Wilson. And what was he? He was a single-handed practitioner working in a single surgery from his own front room, you know, in the way that dentists did 30, 40, 50 years ago. You know, people weren't on the high street. They were operating out of front rooms, and they weren't working in partnerships and teams of people. They were all largely single-handed practitioners who'd set up squads. So I think that my expectation was always that that's what dentists did. Dentists were self-employed. They worked by themselves. And it was just innate. I just felt it was something that if I didn't ultimately run my own business, I would be unfulfilled.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you are in South Kent, and it's a fiercely competitive area. And in fact, not only competitive between orthodontists, but of course, in recent years, it's become competitive with general practitioners as well in certain aspects of the work that you do. I appreciate, I mean, the obvious question is, how do you stay ahead of the competition? But actually, you've already told us, because you've given us these, you know, these 4 guiding principles right at the top of the conversation. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that your word of mouth systems are brilliantly well managed. I know for a fact that the customer service aspect of what you do is paramount. You're clearly resilient. Go figure. And you are the type of person who sees the bottle as half full all the time. Is there anything else, though, that you look back and you say, okay, you know, with the business is thriving. Why is the business thriving in this market that we're in at the moment?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And I need to drill down to it a little bit more, in truth. I mean, I think you were leading on to a moment about managing the competition. And if I go back to a generation of orthodontists who were ahead of us, so the Harley Street practitioners, the single-handed practitioners, they actually all looked out for each other. You know, they covered each other's emergencies, they were friends, they had study groups, and they supported one another. And that is a massively positive thing to do. So actually, guess what? That's what I do. I have a small group of orthodontic friends to whom I will turn to discuss issues or say second opinions. You know, now that we have orthodontic therapists on board, we don't really need to reach out to one another to cover our emergencies. but that's what I have done in the past. So my orthodontists like me are my friends. So they're not my competitors, they're my friends. And I guess everybody else at the moment, I probably don't pay any attention to, actually. So rather than get myself in knots about what everyone else is doing, I'm actually trying to focus on what I'm doing and what I can do in my own business to make things better or for everybody, all the time. How do we follow up on patients? How do we try to make sure that the patient experience is good? How do I invest in my staff in terms of their training, their competence, their skill sets? How do I delegate as much as I possibly can and yet keep everybody happy? So that's what I'm doing, really.
All right. So let's talk about how you see the future. Everybody's got an opinion. What's your opinion on where British dentistry is going, and what's your opinion on where British orthodontics is going?
Well, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to comment on dentistry because I haven't, again, it's not something I've paid a huge amount of attention to because I haven't done any general dental practice for a long time. And the circle within which I move in London is very privileged, isn't it? We're all of my friendship group professionally are private practitioners working in and around the West End and Kensington and Chelsea. We are just so divorced from the realities of what dentistry is like elsewhere in the country that I couldn't comment widely. But in terms of where do I see the future going for orthodontics? I mean, clearly we're in testing times. Clearly, I won't undermine what I see going on in the outside world. Smile Direct Club, clear aligners marketed straight to the public. I'm noticing that we're getting an increasing number of phone calls coming through to the practice expecting us to be offering free consultations and really getting quite cross that we're not offering free consultations, which I find is very, very undermining of the vast amounts of effort, risk, knowledge, skills that I've acquired over the years, that I should be expected to share all of that for free whilst managing my own significant overhead. It's complete nonsense, and yet I see the volume of the expectation of the public has been led, as you know, by the big brand clear aligners. That's something that dentists should do, and I disagree. But of course, actually, clear aligner therapy is fantastic. I'm getting some amazing results with Invisalign. Very happy customers, and I've just engaged in my first 5 remote dental monitoring patients, and I can see that this is the way where the future is going to lie, is going to be that because of the advent of this incredible technology, dental practice, our contact with patients is going to change. It's not going to be people coming in and having their treatment managed in the chair side. They're going to be self-scanning at home, and we're going to be engaging as you and I are now. This is how we are going to relate to people. So dentistry we're going to embrace technology. I mean, I'm geared up for it. I've installed 100 meg internet line, a lease line, because our internet was so shockingly bad. I have my iTero scanner. We're scanning every day. I'm upset we're sending scans for 3D printing, etc. And I've just started this remote monitoring, and we'll see how that pans out. But I think that very, very, very soon braces, orthodontics will be delivered via aligners, and it'll be delivered more and more remotely. And we'll have to make sure that we still care for people properly, and that we still keep our treatment standards high and not dictated to by algorithms.
Yeah. So when you wake up on a Monday morning, you're looking forward to a week at work. What is it that excites you now?
So I think it's trying new things, being creative, inspiring the staff. I mean, just having a bit of a laugh, frankly, with the people that walk through the door, look for the laugh. You spend a lot of time at work if you can't find the humour in the day.
Yeah. Yep, that's so true. That's so true. So it is traditional in these types of interviews for us to pass on advice to younger listeners. And what I mean by that is that young dentists who are perhaps at the beginning of the career, they may be considering ownership or first few years of ownership. Advice from Claire for those people.
Well, do your due diligence. That's the first one. Make sure that you are paying the appropriate sum of money for the practice, that you can control the overheads. Focus on great customer care, because generating your word of mouth referrals is so important. Attend to your patients first and foremost. So I always make sure that I get my patient correspondence done, that we follow up on patients that need appointments, that we thank them for sending us referrals, that we treat them like, okay, Chris, so you asked me Monday, what I look forward to is a day of every day of my friends coming to visit me. That's what I enjoy about my working life. So I've always felt like that. That is what makes my day. A happy day with happy people.
Oh my God, I'm so pleased to hear that. You know what? One of my favourite books is a book which is called True Success. And it's actually written by a philosophy professor from Notre Dame University. His name is Tom Morris, and it's been on my recommended reading list for clients for years. And actually, it's a history of philosophy. So if you want a very, very fast track through all the great philosophers of history, this is the book to read. But bit of a spoiler, I'm going to tell you what Tom Morris concludes at the end of the book is the definition of true success. And he says this: you are truly successful when, number one, you love what you do. Number two, you love when you do it. And number three, you love the people that you do it with.
Yeah, well, there we go.
And there we go.
There we go.
And all right, before we hit record tonight, the two of us would be moaning the fact that we're probably both putting a few too many hours in at the moment. But I think we're doing it from a place of love because, we just, both of us love what we do, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's very true. So there we go. Find the love and share the love. Is that what we say to young dentists?
I feel as if we ought to be breaking into a musical at that.
You can't underestimate the hard work that is going to be required and the absolute, total and utter obsessional nature. I am obsessional. My children say what have I got, compulsive disorder or whatever, OCD they say, and I say not at all, but that is what is necessary, of course, to drive the business. Attention to detail, not giving up, being resilient. I will never regret doing it. I never regret doing it. I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled to be where I am at, but it's taken me an awfully long time to get there. And I probably haven't got enough time ahead of me to actually really enjoy the true fruits of my labours. So there we go. But
now,
feel the fear and do it anyway. Isn't that the phrase?
Okay, cool. Now, in conclusion, I want you to share with our listeners what's going on the other side of that closed door behind you. Come on, spill the beans.
Behind the closed door, my staff are having their private yoga session in my waiting room. And the one person who is always too busy to join them is me. That is the summation of my shockingly bad work-life balance, that I cannot even finish the day by having a yoga session on my own premises.
Charlatan! Oh dear. But God bless you, even though you haven't got the time to do it yourself, you actually provide the class for the team as well.
Yeah. So, they're paying, Chris. They're paying.
Oh, they're paying for themselves to do it.
The facility. I don't charge them rent.
So they've all finished Monday and they're all having a yoga class in the patient lounge. Is that right?
Yeah. So there you go. That can be my next goal, is to finish work early enough to go and join them.
Wouldn't that be something to aim at? It would, yes. All right. Listen, I thank you, Claire. I always knew that what was going to happen tonight was going to be fun, and I also knew that what was going to happen tonight would. And that's the great things about these interviews, is that somebody out there will listen to this conversation and it will be on just the right day at just the right time for them. and you never know who that person is going to be.
Yeah.
You do know that you'll be there for that person, and
Oh.
you know, I think there'll be somebody who'll be watching this, and basically what they'll say is this: if Claire Nightingale can do it, so can I.
Yeah. Well, and if that person recognises themselves, will you please email me and share?
You better tell us your email address, Claire.
Oh my goodness, I've done a plug for myself. info@queensgateorthodontics.co.uk.
Thank you. And so if anybody out there wants to email Claire, ask her any questions, or just say, hey, what would you do if you were me? We've got yet another dental business coach amongst us now, Claire Nightingale.
I'd love that. Love it.
Don't you dare, all right? I'm blooming fed up of dentists selling the practices and setting themselves up as coaches. Oh dear. Right, Claire, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the time and the energy that you put into this call. I know that you will make a difference to people out there, and I'm going to thank you on behalf of all the Academy members. We've got something over 200 people now who are tuning into these broadcasts, but the interesting thing also is that these interviews are evergreen. They sit in the back catalogue, they're on the shelf in the shop, and you know, it might be that in 5 or 10 years time somebody will watch this interview, it might be us, and we'll look back at this and we'll say, do you know what, that was a cracker. So Claire, I'm going to let you go and join your staff for the last 5 minutes.
The last stretch.
The last stretch before they go home. But on behalf of everybody at the Academy, thank you for your time, and I wish you a hugely successful 2020 and beyond. Claire Nightingale.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to be asked. Thank you. I'm so honoured.
Thanks, Claire.